Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight, we are talking about Terry Hyatt, one of North Carolina's serial killers that almost got away. He ended up murdering 3 women until one of his drunk friends walked into a sheriff's station and started to confess to a crime that they knew nothing about. With us tonight is Dr. Brian Santana, the true crime professor. I've also got investigative journalist Gracie Sneed with me tonight. Gracie, Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Good to be here as always.
So we wanted to talk about this because this is one of the cases that we found when we were doing research for our book, A Murder on Campus, the professor, the cop in North Carolina's most notorious cold case.
There we go.
That's right. You can get it now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere where you can buy a book.
Or if you want to stick it to Amazon, pick it up from bookshop.org or any of the indie booksellers, wherever you want. We're not particular.
Good point on all those. So Terry's name started to come up when we were looking at Virginia's death, and we were trying to find someone that may have done a similar crime before. And honestly, a lot of Google searches and just going down rabbit holes, Terry's name started to pop up. And the more that I started to look into Terry, the more similarities I saw with the Virginia murder.
Yeah, this is a really plausible. This is one that was actually a really plausible, I think, suspect to think about. If new information had not come forward with some of the suspects with John Rivas and James Gore that we were looking at, Terry would be someone you have to look to really carefully. I think that one of the things that we did in kind of looking at Terry was very similar to what the original investigators did. There you are again. There was
a little technical difficulty.
So with the original investigators, they were pretty sure about 2 weeks after the crime that John Rivas was their main suspect. But after Rivas goes into hiding in Boston, Massachusetts, and is being kind of shielded by his brother-in-law there and kind of disappears from radar, they are forced to, they can't just do nothing and just say, well, our suspect's kind of gone. And they didn't have an airtight case at that point. So they did start looking around at other possibilities. And Terry Hyatt, I think, did not come into this for them for later, but that's kind of what we did. We started looking around at if there was a chance that it wasn't Rivas, who else could it plausibly be? And I feel like of everyone we looked at, Cameron, I think that like he was the one that kind of came to the top of the list.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gracie, you know this area. You grew up in Western North Carolina and currently go to school in Asheville. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on him as well. We know that when he's growing up, he's getting into some trouble. He's stealing purses, and eventually he drops out of high school. I believe he made it to his sophomore year. And then he gets thrown on probation. What do you do when you're on probation? You violate probation and you eventually go to jail, right?
Pretty much.
And so that happens. And then he actually escapes jail. So the reason why I wanted to start off with that is you see this defiance and his real feel for authority figures in his life. Gracie, when you were in school, not too long ago, did you ever have anyone in high school that you're like, this guy just seems kind of odd, and I wouldn't be surprised if he turned into a serial killer?
Yeah, we actually had a couple of kids that I went to high school with that we wouldn't have been surprised. We kind of labeled them as like, if anyone were to shoot up the school, like that would be the person to do it. And just really had a defiancy for any type of authority figure. Especially, I saw it a lot with the female teachers more so than the males. with the certain kids that I can think of. But when I was in middle school, there was a kid that really had a hard time listening to any type of female authority figures.
Yeah, and I think definitely with Terry, you see that. Here's a picture of him in his youth. You know, he's got kind of the mullet going on.
Oh, he looks like he
like
would have been on the wrestling
some
team.
type of, like, right, wrestling team or just tank top.
He's got his whole life ahead of him at that point.
Yeah.
His wrestling gear and everything. Yeah.
Right. But one of the things that Brian and I talked about when we were looking into this is that, okay, we know that he's in that Asheville area. We know that he's not in school, and we know that he's getting into trouble.
Yeah.
And he has some type of, you know, disrespectful feelings towards females. And you can see later on in life of what that snowballs into. And it starts with the murder of Harriet Simmons. So what we know about that is that April 14th is the last day that she's seen alive. And we know that she was at a rest stop in Statesville, North Carolina, which is off I-40. And that's a very rural area for those that are listening. But those, to me at least, feel like very safe areas. Like, that's the area that you want to stop, right?
Right.
And if you're going to have car trouble, like, that's actually a good area to have car trouble at.
Yeah.
And I've been to that rest stop. It's very open. A lot of people stop there. So I'm sure that her guard may have been down. But the next thing that we know that Simmons' car was abandoned. She's not around. There's a tire in her trunk. So I assume that she had some type of car trouble. And then she vanishes. And the next thing that we know is they're finding her skeletal remains in the Pisgah National Forest.
Yeah.
Brian, do you remember the evidence that was found during that murder?
Well, actually, before we talk about this, I think it's really interesting. You mentioned that you're talking about Terry as someone who's committing these crimes in this area, but it's also important to remember, like you point out, he was around 16 years old at the time Olson was killed. And while he is on probation with a lot of time on his hands, we know during some of that time he's violating his probation, like you said.
Right.
But as part of that, the area where Olson was killed, at least in 1973, was an area that detectives at the time described as one frequented by winos and kind of is like a lover's lane. So it was an area that was well known to teenagers. And we know that Terry Hyatt was familiar with this area because one of his later victims we dumped down the street from this. It's very close. It's within a mile of this area. And we know he frequented and liked to drive around that area. I think he was working for a doing kind of odd jobs, but also working on cars at the time. She was killed at least part-time with that. And he would drive around that area. So he's familiar with the area. So you have this situation where you mentioned Harriet Simmons. That's the first murder that's attributed to him, right? Like in the official timeline.
Right.
But one of the questions that we always had was, because new murders are going to be, we'll talk about, or kind of keep coming up later associated with Hyatt, how do we know with absolute certainty that April 15th, 1979 is the very first crime that he commits? We know that we have this period where he is, engaging in petty crimes, and we know he has a period where he's kind of engaging in rape and murder. There's a kidnapping somewhere in between. But we would expect that there would probably be some escalation, right? And so it's hard to pinpoint where that timeline actually begins. And so knowing that there's someone like him in that area at the time who's also capable of doing that, gives you at least pause to consider him.
And it's also interesting because even though he was so young, all the murders that he committed line up almost perfectly in the same sense of how Virginia Olson was killed.
Right. Absolutely.
It's almost like it's like the same signature that he has throughout the 3 murders that are legally binding to him. But even though Virginia Olsen's was never tied to him, it still is almost the exact same signature with the rape situation and with the slashing of the neck.
Yeah, and that's why,
And
Mark
it was the size of
Dempsey.
a pocket knife too, right? The actual murder
Right.
weapon was speculated
Right.
to be about the size of a pocket knife. Like, I mean, that, and we're thinking 1973. Yeah, lots of
Mhm.
people carry pocket knives, but you
Right.
could think about like a teenage boy. I mean, I know like we had like pocket knives when we were like young, that age and stuff.
Right.
And that's what's so odd about this, and is that when you're looking at a case like this, you find a lot of weird people. You
Yeah.
find the James Gores, the John Rivas. We still don't know the real connection between them, and
Mhm.
they're both really odd. And then on top of that, you've got Terry Hyatt, who just so happens to be in the area. And I'm with you, Brian. Like, I do not think that his body count is 3.
And we're also going to have Richard Levi Jenkins, which we talked about in the previous show with Mary
Right.
Burdett. Like, what are the odds that we have like this collection of people that are just deeply troubled, that are all kind of like raping and murdering people, and they're all kind of putting them in the air, this like one area. And these guys are like frequenting this area in a way that their paths could have intersected with one another. It's such a strange thing in retrospect to imagine. And at a certain point in time, must have given people a pause going into the botanical gardens.
Right.
So,
I know people still have a pause going into the botans down here because it is very secluded. Like once you get down in there by the streams, you're not, I mean, yeah, the road's right there, but if you were to scream for help, nobody's going to hear you over the roar of the traffic.
Have they done any type of security measure, like put cameras up there,
I
or
haven't seen.
lighting, or phones, or
Mm-mm. There's none of the blue lights around there, which they have around campus, where you can just hit a button.
right?
The only security thing that they've honestly really done is they have highly suggested having all students that live on campus or are enrolled at UNC Asheville have an app on their phone where they can just hit a button and it sends an out of distress signal for the police to come to you. But if you're in some type of situation like Virginia Olsen was, you're not going to have a chance to hit that button. There's
Right.
not going to be a way.
Yeah, I mean, there's cases like Delphi where
Mhm.
she had enough time because he was walking on a rickety bridge to be able to
Right.
pull out her phone and take a video. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Especially if how Terry ends up killing people,
Mhm.
is in every single case, he ambushes them essentially, whether
Right.
that's ripping them out of a car or, dragging them. It's very forceful and very
Yeah.
dynamic. And I think that is something, when you combine that with his personality and, just his build. I mean, if you're working on cars and doing odd jobs, you're going to have some strength to you. I'm sure he has no problem yanking around, a 120-pound woman.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. And just the blitz style of the attack is
Yeah.
something that both everyone we've talked to has kind of pointed that this felt like a very kind of like frenzied kind of like ambush style attack. And it seems like, it does fit with the kind of pattern he has. He's not someone who is charming people
Right.
into or kind of using his words to kind of coerce people in that kind of way.
Right. No, absolutely. So when we look at that, and then we're looking at these other murders,
Mhm.
it's so odd that essentially he almost got away. Like,
Yeah.
I can't emphasize that even more, that,
Mhm.
if his buddy there, Jerry, did not come forward, I
Right.
don't see these things getting solved
Mm-mm.
at
He would
all.
have gotten away with it had he not. I wonder, did they ever figure out if Terry had actually told his buddy like all those details, or was he with him when he committed
Oh,
those crimes.
no, he was with them. Actually, we've got a clip here we can play that talks about.
Yeah, his buddy is very fortunate.
Yes. I'm going to give me a second here. Yeah, as far as fortunate, I think this is like the best that you can get. This is a guy that actually comes forward and really gets this thing revolving. Here we go.
Conscience. As Buncombe County Sheriff's Captain Pat Hefner listens, Jerry Harmon begins to talk about a night 19 years past. In August of 19...
Yeah, so 1998
Yeah.
is when the investigation gets rolling.
So this clearly has made an impression on him after all this time still.
Right. Well, so he says he had like a come to Jesus meeting with himself.
Yeah.
Other people are reporting that he came in there drunk. I've got a feeling that he was drunk.
Very, very drunk.
Yeah.
More than one beer.
9. Jerry Harmon is 19 years old and hanging out with a new pal, 22-year-old Terry Hyatt.
There's Terry.
At 2:30 a.m., the two men leave a bar and get into Hyatt's truck.
There was a young lady pulled up on the driver's side at a traffic light, and Terry made an obscene gesture towards her, and then when she turned to the left, he ran her off the road. And then he jumped out and ran up to her car and jerked the door open and yelled back at me and said, "Follow me."
Yeah, so when we're talking about that, and that's kind of like that blitz style attack, like we're talking about. And you see that kind of consistent throughout is that stop this. You consistently see those same themes of like, he goes right after the car. He, runs her off the road. With the second murder, he did the same thing. He ends up pulling her down into a ravine, and after he had raped her, and did the same thing where he is stabbing people in the chest, which is so similar to Virginia Olsen.
And it's really one of these things with Terry Hyatt where both the anonymity of the crimes that he's committing, not really having these connections to people. We talk about that a lot of times that, is a significant number of cases when we're talking about violent crime are committed by someone that's in the person's immediate orbit. And it's only when we have the smaller percentage of those crimes that are truly random that have more of that potential to become kind of whodunits, where it's like where it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you're looking for a story. And I think that works in Terry Hyatt's favor. But also when he starts committing these crimes starting in 1979, technology hasn't really caught up with him yet. And I think that as we'll see with Terry Hyatt, that his downfall is going to be that even with these kinds of, these people that he doesn't really have significant ties to, that he's engaging in these blitz attacks, the technology is eventually going to catch up with him because he is being picked up for these different felonies, and his DNA is going into the system at different points when they start collecting.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I thought of too, is like, I wonder if how much of this is just, not scenes being processed properly, as opposed to Terry just being lucky and getting away with this for so long. Does that make sense?
It's kind of crazy how long he got away with it for. And, I guess I didn't put 2 and 2 together that his buddy was my age. Like, that's
19.
That's wild.
Yeah. And what makes this even better is when Jerry comes forward and gives this wild story, and then his buddy Lester gives a similar story, but a whole different murder.
Right.
That's got to be, from an investigative standpoint, they had 2 murders that no one really knew anything about.
Mhm.
And this is one of those things where when all of this does come to light, we kind of talk about this a little bit in the book, but the director of the SBI comes forward and he says, look, he said, we really messed up. And they do a very public kind of mea culpa and say that they made a lot of mistakes during this time, particularly when Terry's going to go to jail for in 1979. He's going to abduct Carolyn Brigman at knife point in Asheville, and she is going to convince him to let her go. Cameron, you remember this whole story with Carolyn Brigman?
Yeah, what was good about that is that they're driving across the French Broad River,
Mhm.
and she is trying to find a way to like convince him to let her go. And he eventually concedes to that, but before he does, he says, I've put a lot of bodies in that river.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we know about one that was dumped near there, near the French Broad. But bodies would make me believe that, there's probably more than a few
Mhm.
that he's put around that area.
Do you think did they ever dredge that river to see
Well, I
if
mean,
they
it's
could
the
find
French
any?
Broad River, so it's so big that,
Right.
I don't think that that would be a possibility. I think they could maybe, if they knew where a body was, they could send, a dive team and all that to try to recover it. Um, but that's the problem with that area. It's so vast that you could easily put a body there and it decomposes and no one finds it.
Right.
Well, and the biggest thing too, Cameron, with this as well is that like when you describe that he's telling Carolyn Brigman these things, he's going to be given a 25-year prison sentence for the robbery and kidnapping of Brigman. And the SBI is later going to say that part of where they messed up was that they have this guy who basically has made these statements, has held someone at knife point, has kidnapped them, and when they're looking into these other murders that Terry committed while he's sitting in jail, he was never once considered as someone to even look into. And so
Right.
and the fact that like that's not exactly turning over every stone. That you have this guy who's committed this and has said these different things and he's never looked at, and that's going to be the big thing that is that they're going to concede was a huge kind of overlap. And the director of the SBI is going to say, like, we don't even really have a good explanation, we just messed up. And yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of mess ups during that time,
Yeah.
and I think that that's one of the things that we pointed out during the book is like, I feel like Virginia's case was one of them with them losing the DNA. But then you've got with Terry, you've got claims of them not processing scenes correctly and whatnot. And then Asheville had that scandal with the evidence lab. And so there's kind of this kind of consistent issues that they've been having with law enforcement in that area. But I wanted to ask you, Gracie, you've read the book. What did you feel about Terry? Do you think that he's responsible for more?
I definitely feel as though he is responsible for more. I still to this day think that I still think he's Virginia's killer, because I mean there's too many coincidences for it to not be. Just the way that the signatures line up.
Right.
They're like, I know he would have been 16, and that's really young. But if you think about how Ted Bundy started off, he was no more than 16 when he started.
Yeah. But one of the cases that we talked about as well was the Sue Ellen Evans case at UNC Chapel Hill, where it was the same MO as well. She gets drug into some bushes, she's raped, she's stabbed in the chest, and her throat is slit as well.
Hmm.
And so I don't know if it is, I have a feeling that Terry was just in that area
Yeah.
and that he happens to kill people in the same manner as, honestly, John Rivas Jr. with, his buddy James Gore watching. But my gut tells me that that's a coincidence. And that's because after this book came out, we learned more information, and we believe, I'm sure Brian can agree on this, that John Rivas is the one that's responsible with James Gore.
Yeah, and I think that when we were researching and writing this, the version that's in the book, we were still looking. I think I think the biggest question we had before new information came about with Rivas was we didn't really have any we didn't have many steps for an escalation. With John Rivas, we had a voyeurism charge and we had Virginia Olsen's murder. Some other areas that would represent escalations and other behaviors came about after the book came out for us. But with Terry, we knew for a fact there's an escalation, right? And so,
Right.
and we knew Terry was in the area. But, one of the things I was just thinking about, we're talking about this like area at the time in 73, I'm looking at some notes in a timeline just right now. And it's just amazing all the stuff that's going on, because I think about like in 19, Terry like is in the time that Terry is like operating like around this area. We also have Mary Burdett killed in 78. Terry is killing people in the same area by 79. The Mary Burdett, her sexual assault and murder occurs feet from where Virginia Olsen's was. And I keep thinking about just like how confusing and difficult this must have been for investigators, because even when they have someone they're really looking at, like you have all of these other crimes committed by a lot of people that seem to have very similar MOs, whether it's you're having to look at the possible connection to UNC Chapel Hill. And the task force they established in 1977 does do that, by the way. They do look at Chapel Hill and look at some of these other crimes.
Right.
They look at Chapel Hill, they look at was the Nancy Morgan and some of the other people, that the other crimes that have some resemblance, even if it's just that, is a college age woman who is sexually assaulted and murdered. And so there's that happening. But the other thing I was thinking about, Cameron, was when you play that clip and we were talking about Terry, was that there's a lot of people, none of these people are masterminds, and there's a lot of really not smart people. Richard Levi Jenkins, one of the investigators in that case, described him to me as inbred, essentially, and said that he was essentially like had severe kind of mental deficiencies. And he's not a smart guy. I mean, he's like sexually assaulting a corpse and gets caught like walking out a second time with blood on him, where someone calls the police. And similarly with Terry, with his friend, if that's what he was, kind of reporting this whole thing. And Terry himself, it's just what amazes me is that these guys that kind of get away for a long time, it's not because they are kind of Ted Bundy style intellect. It's really amazing. In fact, they're all quite dumb. They're like below average intellect, and they do manage to somehow fly under the radar, even if that's just kind of the police are making mistakes or not really looking into connections that should be there, because this is an enormous mistake, and this can be really costly for the Asheville police and the SBI, because not looking into him when he's in jail for those 25 years, when he gets out, things are going to continue.
Yeah, and that's where I kind of see it too, is that when you're looking at these cases and when you're going back and that there's been such a gap in time, and you can associate that with someone being in prison, I wonder how those investigators felt about it when he eventually does come forward he gets caught, essentially. And I want to put up this picture right here.
Yeah.
When we eventually go to trial, and they find out that he's murdered 3 people, there's that looming question of what's the body count? And I know that Gracie, you were mentioning with Ted Bundy. I think that that's something that we all wonder too. Is like how many people Ted Bundy has murdered.
But the thing I think is interesting with that though is that Ted Bundy is benefiting. I mean, he's in Pacific Northwest, he's in Utah, he's in Florida, he's in lots of different places. Before this, there's those national. I mean, they have that police information system, but before a really coherent way for law enforcement to share information. And Terry's like hovering around the French Broad River and places like, I mean, he goes as far as like Charlotte, Mecklenburg and stuff, but like he's mostly, I mean, he's in state. I mean, this is and this is one of those that should not have gone on and he's fairly brazen about it too.
It's like he didn't really think it through. Like he the way that he stayed around, he like kind of wasn't all there. I mean, with Ted Bundy, he moved around all the time, so he wasn't staying in one specific area.
Yeah, and all of Terry's crimes seem very impulsive.
Yeah.
And that's what made me believe initially that he killed Virginia, is because Virginia's murder happened in the daytime, broad daylight. People are walking around. And when I was looking to Terry, I was like, okay, this is the type of guy that just snaps. Like he doesn't really think about his actions. He just, and I think he probably would have been labeled in some type of special ed class, if it was 2026.
There's some
learning disabilities.
There's some of that in there, yeah.
Right. And people kind of described him as being nice and simple. He was the guy that would like work on stuff.
Yeah. Kind of like a good old boy.
Right. But I think sometimes when people don't see the other side of them, kind of like Gracie, when we were talking about the guy that bombed the Olympics.
Yep. Sounds Eric Rudolph.
Eric Rudolph. Thank you. Name flew out of my head. With Eric Rudolph, it was the same thing where you said that like the people around there were like, oh yeah, he was this nice guy. He's the guy that would come, fix my sink or whatever. Yeah. And they didn't see this other side of being a terrorist and bombing the Olympics and these other buildings. Right.
And people still think that to this day. Like they still are like, yeah, he was my neighbor. Like he was just this nice guy. There's no way that he could have been the one that bombed the Olympics or the abortion clinic or the gay night bar.
Yeah. And I'm sure that people are thinking of that with Terry too. I'm sure that his family are still in denial. But luckily in this case, we have DNA and a confession.
But and I also think that I think that's true, right? What both of you are saying, but I also tend to be of the belief that even if it's in retrospect, when you look back, there's likely something, right? Like
we saw that in his past, though. I mean, you saw that with his juvenile record of him,
right?
I bet that if we knew everything, you'd see some voyeurism charges in there.
Yeah.
And, or he committed some type of, break-ins and other things like that. I bet it's more than purse snatching. He just got caught with the purse snatching.
Yeah. And I think his parents and other people knew more than they're actually letting on as well. There've been more of that side. Like I think about that case that's being adjudicated or is being in the sentencing phase in Raleigh right now with the kid that was 15 when he committed those murders.
Right.
And it was really heartbreaking to see the parents take the stand and basically say like, we had no idea, just he was totally normal. It's not like, I don't fully believe that. I think that people want to see or will kind of ignore signs, but I also have a hard time imagining people, not necessarily someone who engages in murder in a spur of the moment, like heat of the moment type thing, like a one-off thing, but someone who either kills multiple people or kills multiple people over a duration of time. The idea that none of those impulses or kinds of tendencies emerge in any way, shape, or form. Because even with Ted Bundy, is people describe him as charming as he is, but his cousin, one of his cousins, wrote a book just recently, like in the last few months, about this as well. And people are coming forward and they're like, yeah, I remember this time when he was at a party when he used to get like really like rough and violent with some of the women, and you would have to like shake him to snap out of it. And like people come forward with like all these stories where it's like, okay, well, it was a little bit more complicated than just there was never a sign in any way, right, that he was capable of doing something like this.
Well, it kind of goes back to Dennis Rader. Like his daughter and his wife at the time, like had no idea that he was out here breaking into homes, murdering all kinds of families, and just like burglarizing all of these places. And like I watched the BTK documentary, and it's like his daughter is still to this day like there's no way like that could have been him, because he just had that composure where it didn't bleed into his family life.
Right. And BTK planned everything. I don't think Terry planned a thing. I think he kept a pocket knife with him and just I wasn't able to find it on YouTube, but there's actually an interview of Terry confessing to the woman that he murdered in Charlotte. And he described it as he just saw her walking on the street and wanted to have sex with her.
And I think that's not his answer. And that's about as close as you're going to get to a motive as possible.
Oh, yeah. But it was very, I'm sure YouTube won't allow it, but it was just very emotionless. And the fact that he just said that he pulled her into his truck and that, he had a knife up to her and that he, raped and knew that his only option was to murder her. But it's the same callous tone as with BTK, where when you see BTK confessing during court, if you pull up those videos, that he talks about his cases that he calls them. Yeah. And it's just very nonchalant of like, oh yeah, like with this case, I did X, Y, and Z, and talks about these horrific things they did, right? Without any type of emotional content. Right. And I feel like Terry's in that same boat. He's just not well organized. Honestly, I think that he got lucky in a lot of cases. In 2026, this would probably, these would have definitely been solved. Yeah. But for that time frame, these are small departments, especially in the 70s. We talked about this in the book, that law enforcement, the mandatory training didn't start till 1973. And so, I don't know how much these cars are being processed and how great of the evidence is being stored and all that. If you watch the TV shows with the Harriet Simmons murder, they said that they processed that car and didn't find any prints. If you see other articles, they say that they never processed it. Right. So who knows? But regardless, I think that luck and just the environment of being in this rural area where you can take someone into the woods, kind of like you described at UNCA, there's plenty of places where if you're attacked, you're kind of on your own, right?
Yeah.
And if you were looking at Terry as well, if that was someone you were looking at, you also have to think about this April 15th, 1973, on the day that Olson is killed. There's about 90 students or so circulating through the botanical gardens. So he would have been close enough in age that he likely would have kind of blended in a little bit as well. I mean, I think the biggest hurdle you would have with Terry is that, they lost the DNA. So there's that. They have Terry's DNA, but they lost Olson's DNA. But there would also be the issue of the blood. And so, with John Rivas, we had information that kind of came about that he actually showed up with blood on him after Virginia Olson's murder. And with Terry, I think that given just how unsophisticated a lot of his crimes were, you can imagine it being closer to Richard Levi Jenkins, where he's like walking out of the gardens, like covered, or walking out of the area, like covered in blood, where someone kind of sees that, and not necessarily that, he's taking a back way to avoid people seeing him or anything like that. And so I think there's that kind of issue no matter who you look at, was just the 3 liters of blood that's lost through a wound that's about a little over an inch wide. And so and so there's going to be presumably a lot of blood on the actual perpetrator, and so how they maneuver out of the garden without or out of the area across the street without being seen.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It would be interesting to go through the files in that area from that time frame and look at missing persons. Because I would bet that it would be really nice if Terry would have a conversation with them again. I don't know if they've tried to have that conversation, but you know, he's at the point in his life. This is a really bad picture of him, but he is in central prison on death row with 2 more life sentences attached to him. So if he, you know, were to survive the death penalty, you would have to like die twice and then he'd be released.
If he's reincarnated, he'll be put back in jail again.
Right.
So he's not going any place. So.
Yeah. So he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And I would hope that these guys would just give it up now.
Yeah.
You know, I know that probably won't happen, but I don't know. I think I need to write him another letter. I tried before. Didn't get a response, but may try to be his pen pal again.
I do think that would be useful if they, and I don't know. I'm just going to assume the best and just say that they've likely reached out to him, the SBI or somebody, multiple times, and he's just not interested in talking, because it seems like, given the mistakes by their own admission that made early, like that would at least be something to follow up on, because it seems more likely than not there's other crimes that he was attached to. But yeah, one of the things I think it is just really startling, like you said, you look at any community and you look really closely enough, and there's going to be a lot of very strange characters that pop up. And whether, you know, he doesn't have to be responsible for this in this particular case to kind of just marvel at just like how many kind of weird people there are that are engaging in a lot of just different kind of violent acts in a very small area.
Right.
Yeah.
And Asheville's such a safe place too during that time, or it's presumed. I mean, what's your feeling now? Is UNCA? I assume they don't have very many crimes, right?
As far as I know, there's not that many crimes. I mean, if there was, they are very good at being tight-lipped about it.
I mean, do you feel safe walking around campus? And
I do. I mean, that's not to say that I don't walk around with some sort of protection on me, but for the most part, I do. I feel safe like walking. I feel safe walking to and from like basketball games. But I mean, that doesn't mean I don't still go in groups or I don't have some type of protection on me, because you never know. And I mean, I grew up in small town. Like, you always had some kind of protection on you, because at dark, the crazies would come out. So
right. So you have your pepper spray and your knife.
And that was the thing.
Pocket knife, taser.
That's awesome.
I remember being at UNCA, and this was like in '99, so a long time ago. But like, I remember it not feeling like, and I know it's a different perspective. Maybe if I was a 19-year-old woman, I would feel differently. But because it was, you know, there's always been some threat of danger on campuses, even before Virginia Wilson, certainly now. But for the most part, at least the people that I remember like interacting with that lived in my hall and other things, there was never really a lot of talk about concerns for safety. Even the areas between the dorms that were, you cross down through the woods and through like areas and stuff. It never felt unsafe when I was there. That was never something that like really popped up for me a lot.
I would definitely say it's a lot safer to go like during the winter, because the only thing that campus has really stressed to us about is the amount of bears that wander this campus. I mean, within the first 2 weeks, there was 3 bears walking across the quad.
That's probably all the construction they're doing in the woods over there, wanting to redevelop everything and pushing all the bears on campus.
Yeah.
is what's happening.
Yeah, soccer field's going to be full of them.
But
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Playing soccer with bears.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's in this whole in the whole Terry Hyatt case is wild because it's also one that's not. I don't feel like Terry Hyatt's committed all these crimes and has likely committed more. But outside of the cold case files episode that you mentioned, I don't have a sense that Terry Hyatt is really well known outside of North Carolina, and even within North Carolina. I mean, Gracie, do you get a sense like in Asheville these days? I mean, had you ever heard the name Terry Hyatt pop up before?
No. I mean, even being from North Carolina, I didn't hear it until I read the book. I read y'all's book. And
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even hear about the Virginia Olsen case until Professor Gooch mentioned it in class.
And that's wild too to me because that was I've always been curious about that too because I got the sense when we were writing the book that some of the faculty members that I did speak to, like they had been hired in the last like 10 years.
Mhm.
They were not aware of the case either. And so it is one of those things that becomes really complicated for the university to talk about. But then Asheville, yeah, it's like Terry Hyatt isn't exactly the kind of the high point of like their like investigative triumphs either. I mean, it's like Kimber was saying, it's incredibly lucky the sheriff's department there is able to kind of have this encounter with this friend. Otherwise, who knows what he would have been doing.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at its pattern, I think that he would probably just kept on killing until he got caught. It's just whole disregard for, really society and women.
And Cameron, do you remember in '98 when they finally like contacted him? We've talked about this before, but the conversation that they had when they were the investigators are explaining where Terry doesn't really seem to appreciate in some sense that he's in big trouble.
I think this shows his intelligence level.
Yeah.
So what happened when they finally sit down to interview him is that they read him his Miranda rights and he says, well, I want my daddy here. And, this is a grown man. And so the investigator actually comments back. He was like, you're a grown ass man. Your daddy isn't the one making the decision. And so he decides to play nice with him. And he was like, okay, well, how about I'll let you see your daddy first. And at that point, I think they knew that, they had enough to charge him. And so they take him to see his dad and he ends up spilling the beans and, confessing. But I think that, and then in 2000 is when they interviewed him about the Charlotte murder. And that's when he just confesses completely because he didn't want another death sentence. But I thought that was kind of dumb.
Right.
It's like,
well,
they've already got you for one death sentence and a life in prison. So,
they need to
what's the difference?
They need to just start pulling up a list of unsolved murders and just tell them that they'll take death off the table if he like gives them the details for these. I think
that's a good idea, actually.
So,
it's really smart.
Yeah. To be like, you know what? We'll give you the minimum on all these if you just tell us where the body is and what happened. I think that's fair.
I mean, they could give him immunity on the other ones if they wanted to. It wouldn't make a difference if he's stuck on death row right now. It has these other life.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't look good, right, to do that, but it would be.
It's the right thing to do to be able to, give a family closure.
Right.
One of our friends, Bill Kimberlin, wrote a book called Watch Me Die. I've got it around here somewhere. And so he has relationships with a lot of people on death row because he witnesses their execution. And then that kind of snowballed into them sending him artwork and whatnot. So some of the people on death row have started to tell him about other bodies that they're responsible for and like where the body is and whatnot.
That's
And
crazy.
so I do think that it's more common than people realize that, yeah, just because he got popped for 3 doesn't mean there's not 3 more, in the French Broad River.
Right.
And I think just logistically from this standpoint, like in 2026, if you are trying to investigate a crime, let's say even in the 80s, that's going to be you're talking about finding bone fragments scattered all over the place. After a year from his first known murder, we know that that body was, they're picking up pieces, not to, be insensitive, but animals get a hold of body parts and it's called predation. Those get spread around. So, I do hope that with a lot of people on death row, that investigators would take the opportunity to try to get them to talk every, 5 or 6 years, whatever.
Right.
Because I feel like he is one of the types of guys that you just need to really ask the question. It doesn't necessarily get a sense. He seems for the most part quiet enough where the conversation would have to be directed by someone else, because we have people like, I mean, even Ted Bundy towards the end of his life, who are kind of in some ways like attention seeking and hinting at other bodies that are in different places and really engaging in a kind of back and forth, or BTK to some extent as well, right? With these different kind of control games that Dennis Rader likes to play to this day, that our friend Dr. Bill knows about very intimately. He's corresponded with BTK for some time. But Terry doesn't really seem to be that way. And I just wonder if it's maybe just people just not asking the right questions of him, because
right. And that's kind of my feeling, is that he may have been written off as like, okay, he's the village idiot, and
right.
Yeah, he murdered 3 people, but they think that they've got him pegged. And especially with him being with 2 separate people on murders, like, that's just odd. You would think that if he was a sophisticated and a planner, kind of like BTK was, that I don't think that he would have anyone with them.
Right.
And then B, he definitely would not have 2 different people with him,
Because, I mean, like with BTK, when he committed his first murder with the family of 4 that were in the house at the time, he murdered all of them and left no witnesses behind.
Right.
And he even went back. I mean, it was stupid. I mean, he drove back in his own car so he could be traced to him. But, he went back and picked up the knife that he left out there when he cut the phone wires.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all very odd. Well, Brian, I appreciate you coming on. Gracie, thank you. Gracie, what are you going to be working on next?
So I am currently working on, like you suggested, working on the book with all the stories from my hometown about Eric Rudolph.
That's awesome. Can't wait to read it. Hopefully you'll come back on and give us some more updates.
Yes.
And that episode will be coming out actually this Tuesday.
Woo.
So Gracie shared with us some stories that have never been in print to my knowledge, to include a bomb plot to blow up the local police station.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. I never knew about that. But it's so cinematic how it goes down, of how he puts explosives near the police station, and then he's going to watch it from the football stadium.
And and hearing why he doesn't set it off is bone chilling.
Yeah. So make sure you check that out on Santana True Crime. That'll be available on Tuesday. And where can people read your articles at? I know you've got a couple out.
They can read it if they go online to the CherokeeScout.com. They can read both articles that I have out, or they can go to my Instagram, Gracie Writes Crime. I've got both articles published there as well.
All right, we'll put your link to your Instagram in the description. Brian, I think I know how we can support you, but go ahead.
So easiest way to keep track of what I'm doing is briansantanaauthor.com. And so I have a newsletter, and I kind of will be providing some updates about things I'm working on. I'm in the middle of a book about a 50-year-old cold case that was recently closed, the Deborah Elizabeth Espy murder. So I've been working with some of her family and some of the investigators who were tied to that. So I'm kind of in the middle of working on that right now. But I also any articles that I'm working on will be posted there, and also media appearances will be popping up on there as well. And of course, at True Crime Professor on Instagram is kind of where I'm most active as well on social media.
All right. Well, if you would like to support me and Brian, you can buy our book, A Murder on Campus, The Professor the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. You can get that on Amazon, Audible, Kindle, anywhere where you can buy a book. You can also like and subscribe to the channel Santana True Crime and follow me on Instagram at Santana True Crime. I'm also on TikTok and all other platforms under Santana True Crime. Thank you so much, and good night.